He has a naked picture of Monica, he takes naked pictures of us, then he eats chicken, and then he looks at them.
At 57, Jennifer Aniston no longer lives inside the noise that once defined her. The woman the world met through Friends, laughing under studio lights, frozen in reruns and memories, has lived several lives since then. Fame came fast, love came loud, and judgment came relentlessly. But time has a way of quieting everything. For years, audiences believed they knew her story because they knew Rachel Green. But behind the applause, Jennifer was watching, listening, learning, drawn not to spectacle, but to character. Admiration for her was never about romance headlines. It was about steadiness, intelligence, decency, the kind of men who leave a mark without trying to own the moment. This is not a story about who she dated, but who she truly admired. 6 men who shaped her thinking, her boundaries, and her understanding of herself. And stay with us, because number 4 is the most unexpected, and it quietly reveals the side of Jennifer Aniston no camera ever captured. Number 1. Brad Pitt. When Jennifer Aniston met Brad Pitt in the late 1990s, Hollywood was already waiting to crown them. They didn't just fall in love, they were presented to the world as a symbol. Red carpets, magazine covers, award nights. At the height of Friends, Jennifer was America's familiar comfort. Brad was Hollywood's golden myth. Together, they became something neither of them asked to be. But admiration for Jennifer grew quietly, away from cameras. In later interviews, she spoke not about passion, but about presence. Brad, she once implied, had a way of grounding a room. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed details. In an industry obsessed with performance, that mattered to her. During their marriage from 2000 to 2005, Jennifer was working relentlessly, balancing film roles while still anchored to television fame. Brad, already navigating a different level of cinematic prestige, never publicly diminished her success. In her words years later, he was kind during a time when kindness was a rare currency in Hollywood. After their divorce, the narrative turned cruel. The world framed Jennifer as the woman left behind, but she resisted bitterness. In a 2015 interview, she acknowledged the marriage without resentment, calling it a beautiful, complicated chapter. That restraint spoke volumes. Admiration doesn't require permanence, it requires honesty. What Jennifer admired most was not the man the world chased, but the man who tried to live thoughtfully inside fame. Years later, when they reunited briefly at award shows, the warmth between them wasn't romantic. It was recognition. 2 people who had seen each other clearly, even when the world refused to. Brad Pitt represented Jennifer's first lesson in public love and private strength. He taught her, unintentionally, that admiration can survive endings. That respect, once earned, doesn't need rewriting. Sometimes it simply becomes quieter. Number 2. Paul Rudd. Long before Paul Rudd became Hollywood's most unlikely symbol of ageless charm, he was simply someone Jennifer Aniston trusted. They met in the late 1990s, during a period when fame was accelerating around her at a speed few people could understand. Friends was no longer just a television show, it was a cultural force. And in the middle of that pressure, Paul arrived without ambition, without calculation, and without noise. Jennifer has often spoken about Paul in interviews with a warmth that feels unguarded. She's called him one of the good ones, a phrase she rarely uses lightly. Their collaboration in The Object of My Affection in 1998 wasn't just professional, it was revealing. Paul's sensitivity, his self-deprecating humor, and his emotional attentiveness stood in contrast to the bravado she saw so often around her. What Jennifer admired most was his consistency. Fame never rearranged him. Success didn't sharpen his edges. While many actors learned to perform even off-camera, Paul remained recognizably human. Years later, as their careers evolved in different directions, that steadiness never changed. She once remarked that Paul was someone who made people feel safe simply by being present. In an industry built on ego, Jennifer gravitated toward humility. Paul didn't compete. He didn't posture. He listened. And for a woman constantly being projected onto by the public, that kind of emotional quiet felt rare. Their friendship endured not because it was dramatic, but because it was dependable. Paul Rudd represented something Jennifer came to value deeply over time. Admiration rooted not in intensity, but in reliability. Not in grand gestures, but in everyday decency. For Jennifer Aniston, Paul Rudd wasn't someone who entered her life loudly. He stayed by never needing to. Number 3. George Clooney. By the time Jennifer Aniston grew close to George Clooney, she had already learned how misleading Hollywood charm could be. Fame had shown her enough masks. What stood out about George wasn't his wit or his leading man presence. It was his discipline. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that holds. They moved within the same social circles in the early 2000s when celebrity culture was loud and unforgiving. Jennifer was still being defined by her personal life more than her work. George, already seasoned by scrutiny, operated differently. He drew lines. He protected his private world. And Jennifer noticed. In interviews over the years, Jennifer has spoken admiringly about George's loyalty to friends, to principles, to a sense of self untouched by expectation. She once hinted that he was someone who never lost himself, even when Hollywood tried to rewrite him. For her, that was rare. George never chased relevance. He let it come and go. He built a career on choice rather than fear, producing films that mattered to him, walking away when something didn't feel right. Jennifer admired that courage. At a time when she was still learning how to say no, George embodied the strength of restraint. Their friendship wasn't built on constant contact, but on mutual respect. When they appeared together publicly, there was ease, no performance, no imbalance. Jennifer has often gravitated toward men who didn't need her to be anything other than herself, and George fit that pattern perfectly. What Jennifer admired most was how George carried power without abusing it. In an industry that rewards ego, he remained principled. In a world obsessed with attention, he valued silence. George Clooney wasn't someone Jennifer needed to learn from loudly. His lesson was quieter. Integrity ages better than image. And once she saw that, she never forgot it. Number 4. Steve Jobs. This was the admiration no one saw coming, not because it was romantic, but because it was intellectual. Steve Jobs existed far outside Jennifer Aniston's Hollywood orbit. He wasn't chasing applause. He wasn't selling likability. And yet, in quiet interviews and private conversations, Jennifer revealed a deep respect for the way his mind worked. Jennifer encountered Steve Jobs not through parties or premieres, but through ideas. In multiple interviews, she spoke about being fascinated by people who built worlds rather than occupied them. Steve represented that completely. He believed creativity was discipline, not chaos. That excellence was earned, not requested. For someone who had spent years being judged for her appearance, that philosophy resonated deeply. She once referenced Jobs while discussing focus and simplicity, how removing excess reveals truth. That idea stayed with her. Jennifer admired how he protected his vision fiercely, even when it made him unpopular. In Hollywood, where compromise is often survival, Steve's refusal to dilute his standards felt radical. There was also something else: his relationship with time. As his health declined, Steve Jobs became even more intentional. Jennifer has spoken often about mortality, not dramatically, but thoughtfully. Watching how Steve faced impermanence with clarity left a mark on her. It wasn't inspiration in the loud sense. It was permission to slow down, to choose meaning over momentum. Unlike the men she worked with, Steve didn't validate her talent verbally. He didn't need to. His life validated a principle she was learning to embrace. You don't owe the world constant availability. You owe yourself honesty. This admiration remained mostly private because it didn't fit a narrative, but it may have shaped her more than many relationships ever did. Steve Jobs reminded Jennifer Aniston that legacy isn't built by being loved. It's built by being true. And perhaps that's why this admiration mattered so much. It had nothing to do with Hollywood, and everything to do with freedom. Number 5. Jon Stewart. Jennifer Aniston had spent much of her career surrounded by charm. Hollywood was full of men who could make a room laugh, fill silence with confidence, and turn attention into currency. What set Jon Stewart apart and drew her admiration was that his humor was never the point. It was the doorway. Their connection formed through mutual respect rather than proximity. Jennifer has spoken in interviews about admiring people who think deeply but speak plainly. Jon embodied that balance. Behind the wit that defined his public image was a seriousness Jennifer found grounding. He didn't joke to distract, he joked to reveal. At a time when Jennifer was learning to separate noise from substance, Jon represented clarity. He questioned systems, he challenged hypocrisy, and he did it without cruelty. Jennifer once alluded to her respect for men who could carry moral weight without arrogance. Jon fit that description precisely. What she admired most was his restraint. Jon Stewart could dominate a conversation if he wanted to, but rarely did. He listened. He paused. He allowed discomfort to exist. For Jennifer, who had often been rushed to explain herself after every personal headline, that patience felt rare. In conversations about fame, Jennifer has referenced people who understood responsibility, who recognized that influence wasn't a toy. Jon's career reflected that awareness. He walked away from immense power on his own terms, choosing impact over attention. That decision stayed with her. There was no spectacle in this admiration, no photograph hunting, no narrative to sell, just a quiet acknowledgement of someone who used intelligence in service of something larger than himself. Jon Stewart reminded Jennifer Aniston that humor doesn't have to erase seriousness, and that strength doesn't need volume. In a world addicted to performance, his authenticity was its own kind of rebellion. And for Jennifer, that made him unforgettable. Number 6. Jason Bateman. Jason Bateman entered Jennifer Aniston's life without ceremony and stayed without condition. Their friendship began long before either of them fully understood how long Hollywood careers actually last. In an industry where relationships often expire with relevance, Jason became something far rarer. Constant. Jennifer has spoken openly about Jason in interviews, often describing him as one of the few people who knew her before the noise grew too loud. They shared a history that predated the mythology, before Friends became global shorthand, before her personal life became public property. That shared past mattered. It meant Jason saw Jennifer without projection. What Jennifer admired most was Jason's self-awareness. He understood his flaws and never tried to disguise them as charm. He spoke candidly about addiction, recovery, and responsibility, topics Hollywood prefers to sanitize. Jennifer respected that honesty deeply. In her own words over the years, she has gravitated toward people who do the work internally. Jason did. As their careers evolved, their collaboration on projects like The Switch and later Ozark, as a supporter and producer friend, reinforced that trust. Jason transitioned behind the camera with humility, never treating success as entitlement. Jennifer admired how he grew without abandoning who he was. There was also safety in their bond. Jason never used her name for leverage, never blurred friendship with opportunity. In a life where Jennifer's identity was constantly negotiated by others, Jason offered a space where nothing needed explanation. Jennifer once implied that Jason was someone who told her the truth, even when it wasn't flattering. That, to her, was the highest form of respect. Not praise, not protection, but honesty is rooted in care. Jason Bateman represented something Jennifer came to cherish with age. Friendship that survives reinvention. No romance, no illusion. Just loyalty, history, and mutual understanding. And sometimes, admiration isn't about who inspires you from afar, but who stays close enough to remind you who you were before the world started watching. At 57, Jennifer Aniston has learned something the spotlight never teaches. Love may fade, fame may distort, but admiration, True admiration endures quietly. It lives in memory, in lessons absorbed rather than announced, in people who helped shape who she became when no script was guiding her. These 6 men were never trophies, never chapters meant for headlines. They were mirrors. Each reflected a value Jennifer came to hold dear. Kindness without performance, integrity without noise, intelligence without cruelty, loyalty without possession. Together, they formed a private education, one built not on romance, but on respect. And perhaps that is her real legacy. Not the roles she played, or the loves the world obsessed over, but the discernment she earned with time. Now we ask you, which of these men surprised you the most? Or was there someone else you believe shaped her more than history admits? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value stories told with care, memory, and truth, subscribe to Legendary Archives, because some legacies are only understood when we slow down and listen.